Okay, today's item is to consider authorizing notice related to recreational urchin take at Casper Cove and Tanker Reef, with discussion scheduled for December and adoption for February. By way of background, the Commission originally took action in December of 2020 to temporarily remove the recreational bag limit for sea urchins and allow unlimited take, including culling in place for a period of 3 years in 2 discrete locations: Casper Cove in Mendocino County for purple urchin and Tanker Reef in Monterey County for purple and red sea urchin. Those regulations are scheduled to sunset on April 1st, 2024. The proposal is to consider extending the sunset date at Casper Cove and include options to potentially extend the sunset date at Tanker Reef. Details and rationale are provided in the initial statement of reasons in your binder, along with other materials and public comments. And I do want to note that there are comments in your binder from 22 students from a 6th grade class in support of the efforts at Tanker Reef, and appreciate that kind of involvement. Today, the department presentation of the background, rationale, and regulatory options will be given by Brian Owens, Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor with the Marine Region.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Susan. President Sklar, Commissioners, thanks for having me. I am Brian Owens, as Susan said, a Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor for the Northern Invertebrate Fisheries Project. I brought with me my fabulous partner, Kristen Elsmore, who's a Senior Environmental Scientist Specialist who handles all our kelp restoration activities for the Marine Region. And we're going to discuss the proposed amendments to Section 2906, which is the recreational take-up sea urchin at Casper Cove and Tanker Reef, as Susan described. Just some background, I think Keith did a really good job of kind of explaining where we're at for the past 10 years, the ecological disruption that happened here in California. So I'll go over that a little bit, not to be repetitive, but I will be repetitive. And then we'll go over the amendments for both Casper Cove, which is a site in Mendocino County at south of Fort Bragg. And then we have a few proposed options for you guys to consider at Tanker Reef, which is a site located in Monterey County, just by the Monterey Bay Harbor. I'll talk about some goals and benefits of the amendments, and then just go over the rulemaking timeline just for your consideration. So as a reminder, there were unfortunate environmental factors that played a role in impacting California's kelp forest ecosystems. For instance, there was an onset of a severe marine heat wave in the Northeast Pacific that occurred in 2014 and persisted through 2016. As a result of these warm waters and other climate-driven impacts and severe increases of purple sea urchin populations, the state has seen variable yet significant impacts to kelp, resulting in loss of ecological function and ecosystem services in certain areas across the state. As for instance, kelp cover declined significantly in Sonoma and Mendocino counties, and then also within localized areas within Monterey County. The high densities of sea urchins in these areas limited the natural recovery of kelp through imposing significant grazing pressure on kelp. And so, oops, excuse me. Next slide. So this led to this, backslide. You jumped me. It's okay. So this led to an action being taken by the Commission in 2020 to amend Title 14, Section 2906. This amendment temporarily allowed unlimited take of purple sea urchin by recreational divers at Casper Cove and unlimited take of by recreational divers of both purple and red sea urchin at Tanker Reef. Both included a sunset date of April 1st, 2024, which is just right around the corner. A sunset date for Casper Cove and Tanker Reef provided 3 years for recreational dive communities in Mendocino and Monterey counties to self-organize, execute culling efforts, conduct monitoring to assess the efficacy of removal efforts, both in terms of social outcomes and ecological outcomes. The purpose of the temporary amendment was to explore the feasibility of kelp restoration via urchin culling by sport divers, and also to investigate any potential environmental impacts from such culling activities. We're now seeing nearing the end of the 3-year period, so the Commission will need to act well in advance of the sunset date if it desires to continue these efforts at both these sites. There could be some public confusion if there's a time gap between the current sunset date and the new regulations extending the sunset date. So this makes it important to make a decision in time to go through the rulemaking process. Next slide. Thank you. So the first consideration is for Casper Cove. The proposed regulation would extend the sunset date for another 5 years because the work there at Casper Cove really is incomplete. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, mobilization of recreational effort had been more challenging than originally anticipated, and removal and monitoring efforts were significantly disrupted. For instance, one of the local dive shops closed during that time, so it made filling the dive tanks, really challenging for them. Additionally, the bull kelp forest ecosystem on the North Coast has continued to exhibit very little natural recovery, making it challenging to assess the efficacy of those removal efforts. Good news, we're now seeing that recreational diver interest is increasing at this site. Previous challenges noted are currently being addressed, so we're hopeful that we'll start seeing progress at Casper Cove if given more time. And I'll discuss the goal and benefits of this proposal in just a few slides for you guys. Next slide. So the next consideration is Tanker Reef. Unlike Casper Cove, removal and monitoring efforts at Tanker Reef have been extensive. The target area of focus at Tanker Reef has also seen an initial detectable kelp response following urchin removal. So in July, the department came to the MRC with the concept of letting the provision for Tanker Reef expire so that the post-restoration monitoring phase could begin on schedule. Final post-restoration monitoring and data analysis are needed to produce a final report for these two sites, detailing the restoration methods and results, and really ultimately informing the development of the statewide kelp restoration and management plan, or KRMP, if I say it again. This is expected to be adopted in 2026. These efforts will also help inform any potential future kelp restoration actions for the Central Coast. However, interest from the public remain high to continue at Tanker Reef and to continue the urchin culling activities. So therefore, the MRC did request the department at this July meeting to develop some potential options for you to consider. Option 1 is known as the no action option. If you don't take any action for Tanker, then the existing provision will just expire as originally intended, and then we and other partners can begin the post-restoration monitoring to inform the KRMP at that site. Option 2, this is considered like a compromise option that proposes a modified boundary to allow urchin culling to continue, but would provide a buffer so post-restoration monitoring would not be impacted by the potential urchin culling efforts in the proposed new boundary area. And I have a map that I'll show you in just in the next slide. Option 3 is just to extend the entire site until 2029, 5 more years, to provide opportunities for the public to continue clearing urchins in the existing regulatory boundary as requested by some members of the public. Option 3 would delay the post-restoration monitoring phase, as this really can't begin until urchin culling has ceased in those areas. Next slide. So here's the map on the screen of the current boundary, which is in yellow, the larger boundary. The modified boundary you see is in red, kind of in the center of the map. And you can see the green restoration area on the left side there, or the cable grid as it's known by the dive community. And the purple area on the right side of the modified boundary is the control area, where urchin culling does not occur. So extending the sunset provision under newly modified boundaries would provide opportunities for the public to remain engaged in urchin removals for kelp restoration purposes, although in a smaller area that is currently allowed. The proposed eastern boundary is positioned around 100 meters away from the existing restoration area, establishing a buffer so that post-restoration monitoring would not be impacted by potential urchin culling efforts in the proposed boundary, and allowing the post-restoration monitoring to begin in 2024 as intended. The western boundary has the same type of buffer, but it's actually aided by a natural sand channel. Option 2 would keep a portion of the reef open to the public for continued urchin removals for another 5 years as requested by some members of the public. Next slide. So a key goal is of these amendments is to have recreational urchin culling efforts evaluated to ultimately inform the broader ongoing restoration efforts in California and incorporate lessons learned for statewide restoration efforts as soon as possible. Some of the benefits at Casper Cove, This would allow for continued restoration efforts for another 5 years, and which will provide essential data to us to inform whether urchin removal by recreational divers on the north coast represents a viable option for bull kelp restoration. For Tanker Reef, for the 3 options, for option 1, by letting it sunset, this will allow us to go in there and really assess the post-restoration, the restoration efforts as soon as possible. For option 2, as I said, the compromise would allow to continue culling efforts as the assessment is underway, so we can do both. And then option 3 would allow for continued culling efforts across the entire reef, but this would delay the post-restoration monitoring, but the public is interested in this option too. Next slide. So the timeline real quick, in August, we sent out some letters to all tribes in California. We got 1 or 2 responses back and we replied to them. And today's the notice hearing. If you take action today, then that should set up a future discussion hearing in December, potentially hopefully adopt in February with a target effective date of March 31st, 2024 for this plan. And next slide. Happy to take questions if we have any. Thank you so much.
Super. Thank you. Sherry, how many speakers do we have?
Yeah, 14 speakers.
Okay. Yeah, just one second. We're going to allow 1 minute for that. I know that Keith is a 3-minute presentation. So Keith, come up and do your presentation. Then we'll do quick questions and then we'll go to comment. Want to emphasize that we're going to have 2 more discussions about this. We've had dozens, so we'd like everybody to be very brief and concise if they can.
Could I ask a question before a question from?
Sure.
It's about the presentation we just saw. I just want to make sure that I understand from Brian and Kristen that, so I'm just looking at the option 2, the graphic that you were showing, and the restoration area that's been being restored for the last several years is not inside the proposed modified boundary. Is that correct?
Correct. It's outside the proposed modified boundary.
So the restoration that we would be extending would be someplace else, not where it's already been happening.
Correct. It would be inside the newly defined boundary.
A place where they have not been culling urchins so far.
I would have to leave that to Keith or stop, but.
Okay, so we'd be starting over.
Exactly.
Okay. Thanks. Just wanted to make sure we were crystal clear on that. This is not actually an extension of the work that's already been done. This would be starting over in a new spot.
Yes.
Technically, option 2 would.
Well, just to clarify, the larger area was allowed. What work took place, we'd have to consult with the volunteers if it was all exclusive on the cable grid, or if there was other activities outside of that area. And then if the work were to cease in the cable grid, that allows us to do that post-restoration monitoring in that area.
Great. So Keith, maybe when you're giving us your presentation, you could address that issue for us and clarify whether all the restoration over the last couple of years has been done just in that sort of blue spot that we saw in the department's presentation, or whether you've been operating in other places, because you certainly have the latitude to do. The existing regulatory boundary, as Dr. Shimon said, was much larger. So if you could clarify that, that would be really helpful in your presentation. Thank you.
Please, Vice President Zavaleta.
I basically have the same question, so I think I'll just sort of add the piece that, I'm curious about getting some understanding of why the boundary doesn't include, for instance, like a portion of the area that was already under restoration in the experiment for 5 years. And, maybe it has to do with other concerns about including an area, or maybe it has to do with a lack of desire to extend the restoration intervention, like from 5 to more years, because that's not part of the experiment. But I just want to make sure I understand whether that boundary was set because of other constraints, or because specifically parties involved are not interested in sustaining the restoration treatment longer.
Yeah, I can take that. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, the purpose of having the boundary, the new proposed boundary in option 2, not include the restoration grid is because we need the culling activities to stop so we can actually do post-restoration monitoring. So the idea is that the grid area is cleared of urchins, those densities are reduced, and we need to be able to see how the kelp responds. Is it able to persist through, through time without continued intervention. Does that clarify things?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's cleared, so maybe that answers the question. I guess I just expected it to include, for instance, like half of the area that had been cleared so that there was a portion that would be sustained as part of the restoration intervention and a portion that would be monitored. So I'm just surprised by it. But maybe we should go
let's,
to Keith's presentation because that might clarify this.
Let's get all the comment and then let's have our discussion about it.
Okay. There we go. So I'm Keith Rutzart. I'm with the Giant Kelp Restoration Project. So next slide, please. So kelp restoration was our goal for the project. The joint agency memorandum you see in front of you was established recommendations for our effort and set criteria for success of the project. It says in summary that the diver data is to be evaluated to consider an extension. Nowhere in this document or in any of our biweekly meetings for the last 3 years was this project considered temporary. If this document said the kelp restoration project was temporary, we would not have started this. Next slide, please. Our plan was to extend outwardly during El Nino and grow the kelp forest to 18 acres. This is a better strategy for a perennial. Next slide, please. There we go. So the provisions, as I know it, is that the MRC was considering 3 different options. One is to sunset. 2 is to restore the kelp 100 meters away, which would be starting a new kelp forest. Or 3, to extend it for 5 years. The kelp on the treatment grid on the left is on the left, and the control area is on the right. In the middle is the red proposed boundary for option number 2. So to answer your question, the kelp on the grid is cleared, and our effort is outside of the grid as well. The majority of our effort, 66% of our effort, is outside of this treatment area. And there is a vast field that is growing faster than we can call them outside of this area, and the urchins are constantly reinvading. You can determine whether it's persistent or not by looking at the diver data and see how little effort is being done on the grid. There's no reason to kill everything during an El Nino year when there's a shortage of kelp. Next slide, please. For option 1, to sunset Tanker's Reef, the kelp defense will be abandoned. 15 acres of kelp will be eaten and the urchin's gonad improved. More urchins will spawn, and our volunteer kelp restoration divers will have made more urchins and will not have a place to call urchins. Next slide, please. Option 2, to make a new boundary 100 meters away, is our current strategy. And this will kill 15 acres of kelp and spawn more urchins and may require outplanting kelp in order to progress against the current. The current is from the northwest. Next slide, please. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, next slide. So option 3, if it's extended for 5 years is chosen, we will defend the kelp forest, which is what you want us to do, and make it grow outwardly along a front. And our divers prefer option 3, and the sooner we can know your decision, the sooner we can go there and defend that kelp. Next slide, please. The scientists want to test kelp persistence without ever having observed the continued persistence of urchins eating the kelp in and around the treatment site or on the barren control site. They seem unaware that there is a kelp shortage and that urchins now mow down our kelp forests. The divers have seen way too much of this, but hiding this from the scientists is a strong testament to our success. Most of our effort is outside of the grid, preventing the urchins from migrating towards the kelp. And scientists have never actually observed the divers culling urchins. Our training programs analyzed our robust accounting of 1,500 safe culling dives by over 233 divers. Our proposed future sites are on a granite, where very little of what we learn on shale is going to apply. There is more to be learned by studying our continued effort than in killing that kelp forest. Next slide. Almost done.
Can you wrap up, Keith?
Almost. Okay. So please consider a 5-year extension of the Tanker's Reef Amendment. That's all. I'll end there.
Okay. Again, Sherry, how many members of the public do we have who want to speak?
We have 13 more.
Okay, we're going to do a minute each, and I'd ask everybody to be concise. We've had a lot of discussion about this. This is very specifically about whether to extend or not, and in which way. Call the first speaker, please.
Will Les Addison, Scott Parsons, and Paul Weekland please approach the podium?
Thank you. My name is Les Addison. My pronouns are they, them. Thank you for acknowledging the importance of including diversity. I am a scuba diver, and I volunteer with both Giant Kelp Restoration Project and with Reef Check. I started diving about 9 years ago, so when the devastation of the kelp forest had just begun. It is horrible to see what is under the water now in the urchin barren areas. With my work through Reef Check, we dive in some marine protected areas and we're counting keystone species in order to see how things are doing. And a lot of what we see is urchins, a little bit of kelp stalk in the way that feels like a clear-cut redwood forest. It is just horrible. We see no fish when we see no kelp, but when we see kelp, and what I've seen on the grid is just amazing with the biodiversity, and I would really like to see the 5-year extension. Thank you.
Hello, Commission. My name is Scott Parsons, and I'm a local diver. I live in San Jose, and I go down to Monterey Bay 2 to 3 times a month. And my experience as a volunteer for the Giant Kelp Restoration Project is going from an urchin barren to seeing the kelp grow. We have the data, so that's what I wanted to express here mostly, and just ask you for your support on a 5-year extension at Tankers Reef. Thank you for your time.
May I have this 30 seconds? Commissioners, Paul Weekland, absolutely no red sea urchins should be harvested or killed in this experiment. There is a viable fishery we developed over this. The purple sea urchins are the problem. The purple sea urchins are the one you said you want to target. Purple sea urchins, not red sea urchins. Do not allow red sea urchins to be killed in this thing. If you're going to kill the red sea urchins, you got to kill the abalones. They eat more kelp than any other critter down there. So this is supposed to be for the abalone. What about the MPAs? The MPAs were going to cure everything, the panacea, the cure-all. Oh, the MPAs. Do not kill any red sea urchins. That's not the problem. That's not the overpopulation. Can't you see where these mines are going? Ooh, first we get the red sea urchin, and then we have to kill abalone too, because they eat the kelp. They eat more kelp than the sea urchins. And it's all about distraction. Let's talk about the purple sea urchin. Let's forget about the abalone. Don't talk about, we're doing it for what? The abalone, but we don't want to talk about what's doing with the abalone. And what about the MPAs? They are going to protect everything. There are no fishing zones. They're supposed to protect it all.
Will Josh Russo, Michael Diamond, Brian Taniguchi, and Pete Bunoso please approach the podium?
Morning again, Commissioners. I was not expecting 1 minute, so I'm hoping that if there are questions, you'll ask me after. The Mendocino project, when the regulations went into effect in 2020, we were gung-ho ready to go, and then COVID happened, and we couldn't go to Mendocino. There were signs on the highway that said, if you don't live here, don't come here, go home. So we weren't able to work in Mendocino at all for 2020, 2021. In 2022, things kind of relaxed, and we were able to, what I did was I would encourage people to go up on their own, but not in large groups. So there was some activity in 2022, but it wasn't until this year that we were actually able to go up in groups. And I've coordinated with many partners. There's been a lot of growth over this last year, so I hope it's allowed to continue. I've partnered with the Sonoma County Sheriffs and Mendo Fire. They bring up their mobile compressors when we do our events, and they fill our tanks for free. Partnered with the department, who's been an excellent partner. Kristen Elsmore and James Ray before her have been excellent as far as working with us. And the Nature Conservancy, Reef Check, many partners, and a lot to do in the future.
I'm Michael Diamond. I'm a volunteer diver with G2KR, and I wanted to emphasize the volunteer aspect of this process, that if the more resistance we create, the more barriers and the more we move things around and cause kelp forests to die and have to restart our work over and over again, the harder it is to convince people to participate in this process. This isn't something that's going to resolve on its own. It needs active and ongoing investment by hundreds of volunteer divers. And the more we can do to make them feel like they are accomplishing something and not going around and helping something and then having it all fall apart again just in order to collect some data is going to make this work and this effort less effective and less powerful. So please just keep in mind that we need people to be involved in the actions here. It's not going to happen on its own. Thank you.
Good morning, commissioners. I'm a volunteer diver for the G2KR effort as well. And my preference is for option 3, so we don't lose the kelp and the accompanying vibrant ecosystem that has been restored. Furthermore, catastrophic kelp forest loss is occurring far beyond Tankers Reef, and I encourage the Commission to allow similar restoration efforts in other affected areas around the Monterey Peninsula and beyond. Thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Pete Guinoso. Happy to be here talking to you today to support the sea urchin removal at Casper Cove and Tankers Reef. I am part of a group called Blue Harmony Foundation. We're a nonprofit group that's working to restore ocean health. Just to kind of express my full support of the extension of the permit, this program has not only had a positive impact on the ecosystem, but also has demonstrated the power of community involvement and environmental stewardship. Having witnessed the transformation in Casper Cove over the years, I can attest to the detrimental effects of sea urchin overpopulation. And the sea urchin removal efforts on their dedicated work of organizations like Waterman's Alliance, Recheck, the Nature Conservancy, and other organizations have made a noticeable difference. And by extending the sea urchin removal permit, we are allowing these conservations to continue their vital work. So thank you so much for considering that.
I believe that concludes our in-person speakers. Our first Zoom speaker will be Ms. O'Connor's Sea Turtle class. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Hello? Yes. Okay.
Hello, my name is Isaac. I represent the Sea Turtle class at Oasis Public Charter School. We have been learning about how sea urchins affect the kelp in the Monterey Bay. Keith came to our 6th grade class and taught us how he improves the kelp population, kelp population. As an 11-year-old who cares about the ocean, my class and myself want to be able to enjoy one day diving in a healthy kelp forest. Please consider extending the hard work Keith has done so far. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Ana Maria S., followed by Camille, followed by Barbara Davis. Ana Maria, go ahead, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi. Hi, my name is Ana Maria. I am part also of the G2KR volunteer divers. Recently, finally became certified. It took a while. It was very, very complicated to be able to get certified, which was also kind of a step into actually being able to start helping actively and be part of the volunteers, which was something that also wanted to bring up into consideration. There are certain things that we need to consider, like especially for younger divers, we have to get certified to be a diver, then we have to get certified to be able to actually work with the G2KR, which takes some time, and unfortunately, like that's kind of a barrier that we have encountered. I do want to please just ask that you consider extending the time on option 3, because that way we can continue the good work that we've been doing and see improvement instead of just giving everything away or starting from scratch. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Camille, who will be followed by Barbara Davis. Camille, go ahead, please.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. My name is Camille. I am a volunteer diver with the Kelp Restoration Project, and I would like to support option 3 to allow the project to continue. I really believe in the biodiversity we've helped to create in the area, and I also believe in the power of encouraging citizen science projects and grassroots conservation. Thank you so much, Keith. You had an excellent presentation, and thank you, Commission, for taking the time to listen to us.
Our next speaker is Barbara Davis, who'll be followed by Vasiliki Vasil. Barbara Davis, go ahead, please.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Davis. I'm a longtime Monterey diver for over 30 years, and I'm also a kelp restoration diver volunteer with the Giant Kelp Restoration Project. I totally agree with and support the other comments that people have made about the biodiversity that we've created with our defended kelp forest at Tankers Reef. And definitely support option 3 to extend the project for 5 years and extend our efforts to additional areas. One thing I did want to stress is that our work specifically supports the 6 goals of the MPAs as stated in the Marine Life Protection Act. For example, one item was to protect the natural diversity and abundance of marine life, which we're doing, and also the structure, function, and integrity of marine ecosystems. Another goal was to help sustain, conserve, and protect marine life population, including those of economic value and stress here, and rebuild those that are depleted. Another one was to include protection of representative and unique marine life habitats in California waters for their intrinsic values. And I believe our project does that, and I ask for your support to continue. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Vasiliki Vasil, who'll be followed by Isabel Bowen. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. My name is Vasiliki Vasil. I'm a mom, a grandma, and a mostly retired licensed geologist. I strongly support the work done at Tankers Reef, and I support the proposed option to continue this project through option 3. Besides its enormous offshore ecological significance, healthy kelp provides the shoreline's first line of defense against wave, tidal, and storm surge damage. A kelp forest's natural architecture helps attenuate nearshore ocean energy, which helps mitigate beach erosion and coastal flooding. In addition to supporting a healthy offshore ecosystem, kelp's presence helps secure our own. If a pest was killing our redwoods, we wouldn't step back from a successful eradication program just to see how or if the redwoods recover. Let's not do that with kelp. Please approve option 3 that ensures the current volunteer urchin culling project at Tankers Reef for another 5 years. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Isabel Bowen. Isabel Bowen is the last person who raised their hand while the queue was open.
Hi, my name is Isabel Bowen. I am a new scuba diver and prospective volunteer, and I would just like to strongly urge the board to vote for option 3.
That concludes our speakers who raised their hand while the queue was open.
Great, thank you. I'm curious about something that my understanding was this was an experiment to see, A, if removing sea urchins was feasible, if kelp would come back, and then if it would persist, right? So I think I see why we would not leave that area alone to see if the kelp that's come back persists. And there's also an overarching thing is this possible on a scale that can make a real difference? There's hundreds and hundreds, so that's not why we did this?
That is why we did this.
Right, and so my question is, at this point, we need to have those questions answered for that experiment to see whether or not, A, it makes sense to do on any larger scale, and I still wonder how large a scale we can do it to make a difference. Not that, and I don't want to in any way not appreciate the incredible effort, the desire to solve this problem. We don't need to be told why kelp's important, right? And I'm not criticizing anybody for saying that. It's fine to say that. We're very aware of how critical kelp is on so many levels for the California coast. I think we're all equally depressed about the current situation and the way it's evolved. But again, with limited resources and even with volunteer resources, we want them to be used well to solve the problem at hand. And so those are my questions, and maybe my fellow commissioners or maybe the staff can answer these to some extent. or Chuck.
Well, I'll go in the queue. It looks like it's getting ready to be an active engagement, but I have a few
But go ahead,
thoughts.
please. Let's let the director go if we can, if that's okay.
Yeah, look, this space is further confused because collectively the state hasn't completed a kelp restoration plan. We also, within our MPA kind of approach, haven't figured out some specifics on how restoration will be handled. Third, the sanctuary has a voice here, and it's not clear to me the sanctuary has thought through, how it wants to handle, activities, in its boundaries. I also think going forward, let's each recognize the volunteer dynamic and the scientist dynamic want to end up in the same place, I believe. And we need not make it, volunteer versus scientist. So from there, I think what's on the table is best I can tell. First, with respect to commoners, this had to have been interim because it was about a sunset. What is a sunset but interim? So it's a little disingenuous to suggest there was never the idea it was interim. That said, 2 of the 3 options continue the volunteer opportunity. So there is 2/3 of what's on the table that continues to present volunteer opportunity in one of the 2 locations. The other location, I think, is continuing. And then the question becomes, in my mind, where do you want to end up over time? Is this actually a practice which will always be necessary? That's a reconciliation, a discussion. That's not unlike conversations we have on the terrestrial side around dealing with coyotes. Do you want to commit yourself to a permanent full-time effort of eradication in order to keep some sort of balance? Don't know. Look, it's not the decision meeting. You've got 2 options, each of which create volunteer opportunity. Maybe you just carry it to the next meeting and continue to debate.
I would just want to kind of put a fine point on it. I think it's less like coyote eradication and more like going the business of redwood tree farming, to try to build a new forest. Because that's what we're talking about. 700 miles, or I don't know, 600 miles of coast and a couple miles offshore of forest. I'm sorry, yeah, I'm saying the kelp, in terms of is the kelp the whole way. Okay, so yeah, so anyway, but appreciate that, Chuck.
So I'm really interested in other folks' responses to what I'm about to say, so that's why I'm trying to get it in. I feel like I've been listening to conversations about this particular issue for a number of meetings now, and I actually understand it for the first time in a different way, and I'm really grateful for that. And it's just finally become clear to me that there are some really different goals here. So I had understood this the whole time. I think I had been thinking about it as an experiment where there was an eye towards whether this is something viable to be scaled. And that's certainly the way that the department's ideas around monitoring outcomes, if you stop the intervention, you see whether the urchins come back and at what rate and so on. That's the paradigm, I think, that the goal that the department is articulating. But I think Keith's comments and presentation made much more clear to me today that that's not a question, right? It's a foregone conclusion you conveyed that if you stop doing the culling, the urchins are totally going to come back, right? And I agree. This is not scalable, as in if you take them out somehow some magic thing's going to. Unless we also are talking about changes involving otters and sea stars and things like that. But that's a different issue. So this isn't really about an experiment to see whether this is a scalable thing to restore kelp forests at larger scales. It's maintenance of that one recovered patch of kelp forest that's there at Tanker's Reef, and it's about the value of this particular local forest that is going to be sustained only by constant effort. There's no expectation that it would stay if you stopped the intervention. And so it's an ongoing tending effort to have that patch of kelp forest right there off of the coast of town. That is a different, that's a different thing. So I guess my question is, how do we feel about that? Like, I understand there have been a lot of concerns about this over the years, and I just want to circle back to like, what are the concerns around having that be a locally hand-maintained, tended kelp forest? Or some additional period.
Commissioner Hosser-Carmerson, please. You had your hand up for a while. I'm sorry, I didn't notice it.
Thank you, President Sklar. I think it's important to, excuse me, continue to research, monitor, and get more data. I think that is just imperative. Trinidad Harbor, where I live and work, is an area of special biological significance. There's urgent concerns about that kelp forest. That's why it's an area of special biological significance, and the purple urchins are destroying it. So we're working with Santa Cruz University, Cal Poly Humboldt, and other agencies in creating a research project. So I think it can be done more than in one area, but I don't think we have the data and the research we need to determine how effective it will be. So I support moving forward with that 5-year extension. I support more tribal and university research programs going on to find the answers that we need.
Thank you. Commissioner Murray.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for those comments, both Commissioner Hosser-Carmerson and Vice President Zavaleta. I want to make sure that we are not revising history. This site, so if this was a site that we chose because we care about this site and this patch of forest into perpetuity, we would have chosen this site for presumably for some kind of special reason, kind of like what Jackie's talking about, or sorry, Commissioner Hosser-Carmerson is talking about on the North Coast, right? Some kind of area of special biological significance or something. That isn't why this site was chosen. It was chosen because of easy access for volunteers to go and a variety of other reasons. If we aren't talking about scaling, if we aren't talking about an experiment, and to be clear, so far it has not been a scientifically designed experiment. We're just doing monitoring of a regulatory change. That's what we're talking about doing, right? That's sort of what we are doing so far. If it's not about an experiment, if it's not about scaling along 1,100 miles of coastline, and it's just again about this special patch, then I would think we would want to keep it as this special patch that we've already been culling in for a few years. And that's not actually what I'm hearing, right? That's not one of the things being proposed. And it's also, and I could be wrong, but I feel like there's a little bit of confusion, right? Because my understanding is maybe you haven't been still culling in that same special patch for a couple months. Have you been culling someplace else or not culling, but not in that special patch that we've been culling for the last couple years? So if it was about this special patch, we'd still be just focused on that special patch.
We love this special patch. I mean,
Put your mic up.
Oh, when you cull urchins and you restore kelp, you know, that kelp owns you. Okay. So yeah, our effort has been outside of that special patch, and by by removing it, you're right, it will die of urchin invasion. So your question is, what is your question to me again?
If it's about this place,
yeah.
Why did you stop culling in this place?
Oh, yeah. So because this option number 2 is on the table now, that we have to move our kelp forest 100 meters away, not just adjacent, where it would be good if it was adjacent because there's actually a sand channel there and we could kind of work it on the other side. But it has to be 100 meters away. We have to stop our effort on the reef because we don't have that many people to do both, right? So we have to, and we've been doing that for the last 2 months since the end of July. We've been working on these other areas and going to the east and culling the urchins over there so that we can grow the kelp forest in that other direction.
I want to make sure I understand which is the
Yes.
chicken and which is the egg. Did you
Okay.
pivot to this other place in anticipation of this new spot that was going to be proposed as option 2?
No.
Or is option 2, does it look the way it does because you've already moved to a new spot?
Option 2 drove us to the east.
So it's the former.
But I mean,
we're not even close to.
it hasn't even.
It's a notice here.
I learned about it in July. So, yeah, that's when we.
Well, I would
Brian
just say
met
there's been
and
a
we
lack
said,
of communication then. I mean, nobody said, go abandon, the work that you've been doing for a couple of years
Yeah.
and go to this other, like.
Because it's going to be sunsetted,
There's a real
and because
disconnect here.
option 2 is a possibility. So we have to allow for that possibility.
Well, okay. Yeah,
Does that
yeah,
answer your
yeah,
question?
totally. Yeah.
So, might I? And I do think once the conversation starts, then you're going to have to figure out where you want to end the conversation for purposes of today. But for discussion's sake, let me assume you really are going to end up debating 2 of the 3 options. Each of those 2 allow some activity to continue. The allowance of the activity in this space is just where it occurs, right? That's the difference between the 2. So at some point, I think the commission needs to decide which path are you doing this for? Are you doing it for the purposes of testing and monitoring?
Yeah.
Or are you doing it because it's valuable to protect a particular place for which we have a strong relationship and citizen activity? I think either is valid, but I think when you get them confused, it's not fair to any of us, including, frankly, the department.
Yeah.
Because we sit through meeting after meeting with a fair amount of accusation, and I just think the commission needs to decide which is the rationale. Right now, your options, one option is about a rationale, the other option is kind of more about the other rationale.
Yeah.
Maybe you have that preserved enough. You go to the next meeting, but you've got a lot more focus and clarity on how you want to tackle this in the next meeting.
I just want to frame it in just one way. I'm not about the substance. And I don't mean this facetiously, and I don't want anybody to be insulted by it.
No offense.
But one option is to complete an experiment to see what it means and what we can do. The other is kind of an adopt a forest approach, where we allow, because if we're going to allow one group in one place to do it, we're going to need to allow other groups to say, if they say this is a specific place that's really important to us, and we're going to do the work to try to preserve it on an incredibly small scale compared to the overall problem. We have to decide which of those we want to do, if any. Is that a way to frame it a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I mean, Palos Verdes, right? Bay Foundation has been restoring 58 acres of kelp in Santa Monica Bay for decades, right? And it works, right? If you keep doing it forever, it works. So, but I really appreciate the reframe. Like it has really become clear that we're talking about 2 different goals. And when we talked at the MRC, those things were still being conflated, right? Like we were still talking about like, is this an experiment that we can export to other places? If we kickstart Mother Nature, can she take it from there? Like that was very much a live discussion, and nobody said, no way, there's no chance the urchin will come back and the kelp die. Like that was not said in that way, the way that it has been today. So I agree, we just have to be really transparent and honest about, which goal we're shooting for, all of us. And I have something else I want to say, but maybe I want to save that for later. Yeah, but I do still think there's the issue of like the site we've been working on for a couple of years and now doing something totally different. I just want to be eyes wide open. I mean, it's a brand new project, essentially. It's not really extending. It's not extending or avoiding a sunset. It's starting a new project. That's what it is. And I do want to say one other thing. I said it a lot of times, but I'll say it today. Like the volunteer energy, the care for this resource, for these forests is unmistakable and clear and appreciated. We are very grateful. We do want to harness the energy. And if it's adopt a forest, into perpetuity, or I don't want to say perpetuity because that's not what the regulations are likely to say, but, that may be a noble cause that we do want to support. But I appreciate that we are no longer conflating these 2 different goals. I think that's super important.
I guess I have one more question, if it's okay. Did I hear right that it's clear from what we've done that if you don't continue to remove urchins, that they come back fully?
They are already reintegrated.
They're already
in the
doing it. Okay,
site,
okay,
yes.
thank you. I just want to make sure I was clear on that.
I think I was confused about why that was ever a question, and it's part of like why I think I regarded this project differently until today. But I think the thing I want to insert right now in this conversation is just that if there is a rationale that people are interested in sustaining the option for when this goes forward, it may be that the wrong area has been defined as the area to which to constrain and limit activity, because if this is in fact more of a model of tending a place in, a continual way, then it makes more sense to me to consider at least constraining activity to a smaller area that includes the area where you've already done the work. And if the department wants to follow the return of urchins and the demise of some portion of that forest as an experimental check on, because that is part that, there's value to doing that. That is part of science, is just understanding rates, it's going to happen, how fast, in what ways, spatially, whatever. Maybe there's a portion, you've already stopped working in there, that gets monitored. But I just want to put that out there, because otherwise we're not going to have an option on the table that does define a more limited area for activity, but that also accomplishes the objectives of the folks who've been bringing this to us, as well as the objectives of the department. Notwithstanding the idea we can't have it both ways, I think right now we have two options, one which has it only one way, and the other one which kind of has it the other way but not constrained. It's not a perfect fit.
I feel like we need to, among ourselves, decide what what the purpose here and what we want. We would consider, with full consideration of all the possibilities, but I think we need to find what our purpose is here before we can decide, whether any of these options make sense at all.
And I think, I don't feel like I necessarily understand the answer to the question. Okay, you helped frame up that if we do it in one place, we then are probably considering doing it in other places. And I think that may be a reason to proceed with caution. But I also want to make sure I understand whether there are other related reasons that have to do with the resource or concerns about impacts of the activity or anything else. So I just want to ask that again, because I did not hear that in public comment, for instance, and I just want to make sure that's part of the conversation.
Can you restate that?
As a question for the
What are the negatives of the activity that's being, like, let's just say it is tending a place continually. What are the concerns around that, whether that's from the department or other stakeholder groups?
I can speak kind of briefly on that. Part of one of the assessments that's being done at Tinker Reef is an assessment of the potential impacts or potential negative impacts of the culling activities on the reef itself. So Tinker Reef, the substrate at that site is very soft shale habitat, and so it's very brittle. And so our partners at the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, in collaboration with some other department staff, conducted a study to independently assess impacts to the reef. And unfortunately, they're not here to speak to the details on that. I don't have those at hand, but we can bring some more information to the next meeting about that. And then I don't know if that answers your question, or at least in part.
Yeah, I think it would answer the question when it's available to hear whether that is something that's having an impact. Sure.
Yeah, and then, if the tending, or however we want to frame it, if the tending or the adaptive forest, other people are going to want to do that too. How do we decide what, is it about being a special place? Is it about volunteers being close by and having the folks to do the work? So that's a bigger conversation. Since we're having bigger conversations, I'm going to say one more thing. Which is this notion of restoration in MPAs. I think, Chuck, you opened the door, so I'm going to walk through it. Restoration in MPAs we've been anticipating a document that was going to come out of the state. It hasn't happened yet. Sometimes I wonder, do we need a big, long document on that, or do we need internally, because it's been a couple of years now and we still don't have it, do we need a Fish and Game Commission policy on restoration and MPAs? Maybe it doesn't need to be a 150-page document. I mean, maybe that's good too, but maybe in the meantime, in the absence of something, maybe we have our own policy on restoration and removal of invasives. Is removal of invasives considered restoration? Like, we don't have answers to these questions and we keep sort of dancing around them, and we're making decisions without having that clearly written down. So
I really appreciate that you brought MPAs into it, because in a way what we're talking is a new group of MPAs with restoration, right? We're talking in a way. I mean, they're not literally, but we're creating these new protected areas that we're doing restoration, which we don't currently do in the MPAs, which we are going to discuss whether we should or not should do. It's in a lot of ways a much bigger question here than the specific thing here.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's because these same groups of people have come forward over and over with petitions about, culling inside MPAs. And I know that during the DMR, we're going to get questions about culling inside MPAs. And I'm just anticipating that, these issues are not going away. And I don't know how long we want to wait for the big fancy document.
Fair enough. I think Dr.
I could provide an update on that. So we are working with our colleagues at the Ocean Protection Council, Coastal Commission, and other agencies on a broader marine restoration and mitigation policy. And within that, as we've talked about, is identified the need to figure out what do we collectively want to do regarding restoration and MPAs, right? When do we encourage it? When do we discourage it? When is it necessary? And I would welcome the opportunity to have that discussion, perhaps with the MRC and stakeholders and tribes, to provide some clarity and some guidance so we can take a consistent approach moving forward. Two additional pieces just to clarify. Commissioner Murray, you talked about invasives, just to remind us all that we've done a really good job demonizing purple urchins, but they are a native species. I know that wasn't intentional on your part, but I do want to clarify that. And then also
if I could, just very briefly, I was talking more about, is removal invasives also restoration? Because we also get questions about removing sargassum in MPAs. Right. It's not just about culling urchin, which purple sea urchin are very much a native species. I am aware and I support it and I don't villainize it.
I know. Yeah. And then the other piece about de facto MPAs. So we have received a petition to prohibit fishing in this area that we're talking about today that the commission has previously rejected. So also something else to think about as we move into this discussion, which I really appreciate, of, is it a science project? Is it an adopt a reef area? Is it a little bit of both? What are the other actions that may come with that down the road in terms of, do we restrict other activities if there's restoration going on, both from a safety perspective, from a restoration standpoint? So these are all good points for us to continue to discuss as we proceed.
May I make a suggestion that we move forward with the notice with all options on the table? We often do that, right? We don't have to decide, even there was a suggestion of deciding some out of options today. We don't do that. At the November MRC, and this is on short notice, we discuss this general issue, Samantha, of MPAs and this possibility of shortening or creating a shortcut, at least, while we're waiting for the longer report, combined with the discussion of whether or not we think creating specific areas for want of a better way to describe it, of local folks who are passionate about it adopting certain areas, having that broader discussion, and then come back with that informing this, because I don't feel like I think we have to figure out what we're doing.
I want to be really careful. I don't want to conflate these two issues. I am not saying that there should be culling inside MPAs. I just want to be very clear. It is adjacent, right? And it is a conversation we are going to have. So I don't think that informs this. This is not an MPA. I do not think that this project should go into an MPA. I want to be super clear. I think it's a separate conversation we need to have. But I think our sort of soul searching between now and a discussion hearing has to be about, what do we want these projects to be? These outside MPA kelp restoration, purple sea urchin culling projects. Do we want them to be science experiments? or do we already know the answer to that experiment? Or do we want them to be, adopt a kelp forest?
Okay, so let me revise
Yeah.
and say that, okay, request that we have that discussion about the MPAs on some method, yes, totally separate, that we ask staff, we're asking staff and department to work on that coming up soon. Okay, separately, do you think we should have this discussion about these areas in the MPA where we can have that broader discussion to inform us coming back here? Or are we already here and so we should just plan at the discussion meeting, next meeting, to have this philosophical discussion about what we're doing here and which direction we want to go and decide on that, so that will inform on culling, just on culling, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't see that we need to have a discussion about MPAs in order to move this forward. So it's a totally separate issue. Yeah, I want to agree with that. No, I know you get that. So I just want to say, like, but I want to reiterate it. And then also want to point out that right now the motion includes potentially options that are not specific, like about area. So option 2 right now is just referred to as a partial area extension. And so that leaves open some room to circle back to this question of like, well, what partial area between now and the next? Because I think that's actually, I'm going to bring it back up. It's a concern if we're not going to have the philosophical discussion now about what this is for, then I would like to make sure that when we do come back at our next meeting, we have options on the table that support both directions. I guess we have to do that. Right now, the only direction that's supported by the partial area defined is the characterizing this as a scientific experiment in which we are not sure of exactly how urchins would come in at what rate. I think, though, I would again reiterate that I think there's no question they're going to. Like, so is there a different partial area that needs to be available, you know, to support the other direction, that this would be a local tending project? I don't like the adopt a reef formulation. I'm just going to say that that's not what this is. This is, anyway. Yeah.
It's not what it's not what, I don't think any of us thought that's what it was. Right?
And I'm saying I don't like the term. I think just tending a local area that like people have a relationship with is like that's much broader than like a thing with a slogan attached to it. So it's fine that you used it, but I'm not picking it up and running with it.
And I was just trying to steer us in a direction because it wasn't an artfully chose word, but it's not totally inaccurate either in terms of describing it. So are we kind of an agreement then that we want to come back with it? That we want to make a motion to notice, and that we want to leave all options that were suggested on the table for the discussion hearing, and that we want to have a discussion about what our intent is here. No. We're having our discussion now. Paul, I'm going to ask you to be quiet. Can you?
Mr. Weekland, he has the opportunity to talk because he's the individual leading the project. Can I also just, I want to point out a couple of things. I believe that the department included a map in the draft documentation of where the option for a partial extension would exist, and that's in the materials. And secondly, want to acknowledge that there really aren't 3 options on the table. One of the options, it's a misnomer, is to let the existing regulations just sunset.
Yeah,
that's not really an option. That's the reality of today. So we're really talking about 2 options. It's, do you want to extend the project, right? The other 2, extend the project currently existing for some period of time, or some portion of the reef that's a different portion identified in the documentation. There's a portion identified, and that was the recommendation, was to look at those 2 as an alternative to allowing the existing regulation to expire, to meet the existing sunset.
And can I add a slight complication to that I think also gives you more flexibility? Melissa said, or sorry, your executive director said, that's an option. Letting it lapse is an option for today, but technically it's not just today. It's you can go to notice, and as long as you don't adopt the reg, the sunset is still
Correct, that's what I was
the
saying, is
default.
it's not an
It's-
option,
but
it's the reality of what is today.
Yeah.
That is going to expire
to
regardless
some-
of whether you take action.
To some extent, that's semantic. We're making a decision to let it expire, so it is still one of our options.
Right,
I mean,
my point
there's
is,
the-
my point is, you don't have to make that decision today. You can go to notice, and then if you ultimately choose not to adopt it, then that's the that you're
preserve.
preserving that still.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioners. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Isaac from the Sea Turtles.
If, I have a question. Sorry. My question is just a administrative question. The map that is associated with it, if we were to move forward with going to notice, would that map be the forever map? Or could we, for the option 2, or could the map change? Do you understand what I'm saying? Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I,
As long as we're not going to the final hearing, we have flexibility to adjust it and make changes up until the decision hearing.
I don't think that's the case because we define the boundaries in the proposed regulations.
Yeah.
The broader boundaries defined.
With the modified boundaries defined.
Yeah, so they're all defined in the proposed regs, so any changes would be a renotice.
Yeah.
Which is
Well,
okay,
not,
but
not a renotice necessarily, but a 15-day
let-
notice.
Again, at this point,
Correct.
we could say now that we want to look at all options, including ones beyond that were suggested in this, because we haven't given notice yet. So we could say it more broadly, I think, Commissioner Murray. I think that's up to us.
I think what you could say in your draft ISOR that gets noticed is you could say that here's the initial site that we're looking at per the recommendation from the department, but the commission is also going to potentially modify those boundaries on the existing reef. So that it's clear to the public, you're not talking about modifying those boundaries and setting it someplace, 3-4 miles away. You're still talking about the existing reef, the existing area where some work has been going on, so that there is some understanding that you may choose during either the discussion or adoption hearing to slightly modify those boundaries. And that, I believe, from a legal perspective, would give the public sufficient information about what you're considering.
Thank you. No, I was just going to clarify that third option, that my understanding is from a regulatory perspective, you could narrow those boundaries with a 15-day notice, which would not slow down the rulemaking process. So you would have that flexibility in the process.
But just to make sure I'm clear, if we make the motion with the language that Director Miller-Henson just suggested, then we would not constrain ourselves to the specific boundaries that are depicted in that figure. Like if we included language along the lines of partial area with the option to modify the boundaries within the existing reef. Is that right?
You've got two different regulatory documents. You've got the ISOR and you've got the reg text. And so you have to go to notice with some draft reg text. And what your executive director was referring to is if you go to, you pick one of the options to go to notice with, which picks specific reg text, but you build into the ISOR language, and you don't have to dictate the exact ISOR, but you should, in part of your motion, you should express the flexibility that you want for final adoption, and your staff could revise the ISOR to explain that there's that option, that potential, I should say, for your final action, and then you're setting yourself up to be able to approve a 15-day notice some point in the rulemaking, at which point the 15-day notice would change the reg text and clarify the ISOR ultimately.
Thank you for that translation.
That's very helpful. Okay, so where are we?
I'm fine to go to notice, preserving lots of options.
Is that a good enough of a motion?
Yeah, I think I would be fine to go to notice, preserving some options. I mean, I'm still not completely clear on how to phrase this, but I think from my perspective, first of all, Commissioner Hostler-Carmison indicated support for 5 years on Casper Cove, and I think that's fine. And that same thing true for Tanker Reef, but there's this partial versus full thing. And I think to my understanding, what would make sense is to go to a partial area extension, but to retain some flexibility for the boundaries that are depicted in like figure 1 on page 5 of the eyesore to move. And I think we have a mechanism to do that. I just want to make sure that the way we read the motion then would preserve that if that's the option we're going to go with.
So maybe Mike could come up with a motion for us. Hey.
Well, and instead of asking him to do it on the fly, perhaps he does that over lunch and we come back after lunch with the specific language.
Do you need the time, Mike, or do you think you can do it?
I certainly wouldn't be able to do that on the fly.
Okay.
And definitely not by myself. I would need a huddle with
Okay, good,
staff.
got it. Okay, so let's do this. It's perfect timing. Let's adjourn, recess for lunch to executive, I know, Mike, for executive session. We're going to do that in a second. We do have executive session items that we have some folks who would like to speak, I believe. Are they here and would like to? Okay, so we're going to do that. We're going to let the folks involved with some of the executive session issues speak now. So we're continuing this item until after lunch when we'll come back with a motion on it. So Mike, will you introduce the folks who need to speak?
Yeah, so I was going to compartmentalize a little bit. You've got two different adjudicatory cases pending before you. You're going to consider in closed session where the parties have indicated they want to speak. And so the first of those is what I'm just going to refer to as the Vlasky case. That would be forgive me. So that would be D1 of your agenda in closed session, regarding the proposed decision in agency case number 22 ALJ 011 FGC, and counsel for Mr. Vlasky, Michael Linscheid, as well as Michael Vlasky, I believe, want to address the commission. And then the legal counsel for the department, Tatiana Filipova, also wanted to address the commission. So my suggestion is first you hear from the parties in that case, and then I'll tee up the second case.
Let's call them up.
Okay.
Are they in person or on Zoom?
I think they're all on Zoom.
Okay, Cynthia, can you bring the parties from the first case on? Cynthia, are you, Rachel, any?
I'm sorry, I'm temporarily logged out of Zoom, but if we could have Sherry please promote Mr.
So it's Michael Linscheid and Michael Vlasky.
Let's start with Michael Linscheid. Cynthia, can you hear us?
I think it's Sherry.
I'm sorry.
Any staff who has Zoom co-host capabilities at the moment is welcome to do this.
Yeah, anyway. Anyone?
Okay, I've promoted Linscheid. Who was the other person?
Let's do Linscheid first, and then we'll, right? Or do you want both at the same time?
We have 3 minutes, so Mr. Vlasky is going to speak. I'll be here with him. Mr. Vlasky is the one that actually speak.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Mr. Vlasky.
I don't see him.
Sherry, could you promote Michael Vlasky?
See him at the bottom there.
Okay, he's coming through.
Okay, great. Okay, Mr. Vlasky, you're on. Please unmute yourself and go ahead, please.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Yes, good afternoon, President Sklar and the commissioners. My name is Mike Vlasky, age 69, a retired firefighter and current commercial fisherman. Fishing has been my major part of my life since the age of 4 in the 1950s when I started checking off lobster buoys for my dad on his commercial fishing boat. In 1984, I became a licensed commercial fisherman. Throughout the 54 years of my fishing career, I've been boarded by fish and game officers over 300 times commercially and sport. I recently started my 40th year of lobstering. In 40 years, I've received only one conviction for having a wired open, unbaited trap, which was recovered after the close of the 2011 season. Retrieval time now has been extended. It was not until 35 years into my lobster career that I first was cited for having undersized lobsters on my boat that had not yet been measured. In my 40 years of fishing, I have never landed any lobsters that were undersized. It has never been my intention to do so. I value my integrity and my livelihood. I would never jeopardize the privilege to earn a living by fishing. I became a reserve firefighter in Ventura County from 1977 through 82. In 1982, I became a sworn peace officer as a firefighter for the Oxnard Fire Department. In 2007, I retired early as a fire prevention officer investigator in order to raise my young sons after my wife passed away from cancer. I trust that you will read the letters of character reference sent to you by people that have known me for decades. These honorable people are a retired Fish and Game Warden captain, the president and founder of Ocean Defenders Alliance, a retired assistant police chief, now mayor pro tem, a commercial fishing sea urchin diver, and 2 current licensed lobster buyers. They're available to be contacted. Suspending my license for any duration would pose an extreme hardship on me and my family. Given that I've received only one conviction in my 40 years of commercial fishing, I hope that the commission will find a more reasonable disciplinary action rather than to entirely remove my fishing privileges. Thank you. I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Linscheid?
Yes, I just want to follow up. Mr. Velasquez, 69 years old. The proposed revocation would remove him from the fishery completely, and I believe he's made represent himself accurately that he has been a commercial fisherman, lobsterman, and peace officer his entire life, and that's how he makes his living.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, Michael, we're going on to the next.
Well, and then a response from the department through the rep. She's already promoted.
Okay, there we go.
Tatiana Filipova on behalf of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Thank you, commissioners and staff, for your time and the opportunity to respond. I'd like to first note that the recommendation in the proposed decision is for a 5-year suspension, not a revocation of commercial fishing license and lobster operator privileges. I would also like to address the post-hearing character reference letters that Mr. Velasquez mentioned. The commission should disregard and give no weight to any of the letters contained in the supplemental meeting materials on pages 76 through 78, because these letters were not disclosed during the 3-day hearing. The department did not have an opportunity to cross-examine their authors, and they were never considered by the presiding administrative law judge who issued the proposed decision. Additionally, the letters do not discuss the violations, and they do not demonstrate awareness of the extent of Mr. Velasquez's conduct in this case. The letters are also missing important information showing personal knowledge and qualifications necessary to provide character evidence. For example, Gene Martin's letter on page 78 does not describe when and how long he worked with Mr. Velasquez, the level of contact between them, and the specific instances of conduct. In fact, based on department's information, Mr. Martin stopped working for the department in 1998, which would be more than a decade before Mr. Velasquez's first violation and more than 2 decades before Mr. Velasquez's most recent violation in 2021. With regard to the proposed decision, the department respectfully asks that the commission adopt the decision with minor revisions to fix 3 typographical errors that the parties have already addressed with Mr. Yan. Mr. Velasquez is a repeat offender and he cannot be trusted to fish lawfully. Despite assurances he made today, Mr. Velasquez's conduct shows that he will say anything to avoid the consequences of his violations. As the proposed decision explains, after Mr. Velasquez was caught possessing undersized lobsters in 2019, he wrote a letter to the prosecuting district attorney promising to take meaningful steps to ensure compliance with the law. But despite those assurances, he committed the same violation again and again, twice in 2011. Page 24, paragraph 17 of the proposed decision notes that Mr. Velasquez's conduct was grossly negligent and reflects a disrespect for the law as well as the health of California's fisheries. To protect fishery resources and consistent with its designated precedential decisions, the Commission should adopt the proposed decision as revised and impose a 5-year suspension of Mr. Velasquez's commercial fishing and lobster operator privileges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So President Sklar, the other case is what I refer to as the Sparza case. That's D3 of your agenda, agency case number 22 ALJ 006-FGC. The two parties are Mr. Arthur Esparza, the respondent, and the department. Your notice of rejection provided an opportunity for each of the parties 10 minutes, but Mr. Esparza has not indicated that he actually wanted to address the commission today. And when I last checked with staff, he's not on, or at least no indication he's on. So I suggest you go directly to the department, and Kelly McDaniel's representing the department on this matter.
Okay, Kelly, thank you. Welcome. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good morning, President Sklar and commission members. I'm Kelly McDaniel, speaking on behalf of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm here to respectfully urge you to permanently revoke Arthur Esparza's commercial lobster fishing privileges due to his failure to abide by laws and regulations put in place to protect our precious marine resources. On May 1st of 2023, the Office of Administrative Hearings held a hearing on the Commission's behalf. At that hearing, the department presented evidence proving that over the course of the past 20 years, Arthur Esparza committed 17 violations of the Fish and Game Code and regulations adopted pursuant to the Fish and Game Code. The majority of those violations occurred within the past 10 years. Mr. Esparza's violations are diverse and include possession of undersized lobster, allowing unlicensed fishermen to assist in the fishing of commercial lobster, failing to timely submit logs, failing to produce commercial fishing logbooks for inspection, failing to service commercial lobster fishing traps within the required time period, improperly tagging traps, illegally possessing incidental take, and 3 violations involving, can you still hear me?
Yeah,
I
we
just
can.
lost my video.
No,
Okay.
We're okay. Good.
And 3 violations involving the placement of commercial lobster traps within the La Jolla State Marine Reserve and or the South La Jolla State Marine Conservation Area, areas designated by this commission to protect the diversity and abundance of marine life, the habitats they depend on, and the integrity of marine ecosystems. Bad actors like Mr. Esparza undermine the purpose of setting aside those areas for the protection of our valuable ocean resources. Whether it's hunting, recreational fishing, or commercial fishing, the opportunity to take and possess fish and wildlife resources in California requires a high degree of mutual trust between law enforcement and the public. For law enforcement, particularly those wildlife officers assigned to protect marine resources, the difficulty of the assignment of patrolling and enforcing the law along California's 840-mile long coastline cannot be overstated. When marine enforcement officers are confronted with a repeat offender whose pattern of conduct demonstrates an ongoing disregard for the law, the trust between law enforcement and that individual, as well as the trust between law enforcement and the rest of the law-abiding fleet, is jeopardized. To maintain trust with the public and the fleet, and to further the department's mission to protect and conserve the state's marine resources, it is critical that our wildlife officers continue to work to hold those who violate the state's fishing laws accountable. And equally important, the department must be able to secure adequate penalties that serve to deter other bad actors while helping instill faith in the viability of the fishery for law-abiding members of the fleet. Imposing the penalties authorized by the Fish and Game Code demonstrates that the department takes fishing violations seriously, and that the Commission's authority to suspend and revoke fishing privileges will be utilized to the fullest extent of the law. License revocation is the most severe discipline the department may recommend for the Commission to impose under the Fish and Game Code, specifically Section 7857. That disciplinary action, as consequential as it may be, is not one the department takes lightly. Only the most serious offenders are referred for revocation proceedings by the Law Enforcement Division at the department. The ability to fish in state waters and earn a living doing so requires citizens and the department to place a high degree of trust in the fishermen themselves. Mr. Esparza has shown over a period of 2 decades that he cannot be trusted to adhere to the rules to which his fellow fishermen abide. Mr. Esparza has shown an inability to comply with the laws and regulations related to the commercial fishing industry in California. As stated in the administrative law judge's proposed decision, page 39, paragraph 28, and I quote, "Respondent is culpable for his flagrant and continued disregard of applicable laws. He was on criminal probation stemming from his convictions in 2018 and went right back to the MPAs, which he had been banned from entering. He has also continued the taking of undersized lobsters, which both the law and terms of his probation prohibited him from doing. The department has issued citations and warning letters in addition to seeking criminal convictions to attempt to get respondent to comply with the law, all to no avail," end quote. Additionally, the administrative law judge evaluated Mr. Esparza's rehabilitation, looking for admissions of past conduct and a showing that the violations are unlikely to occur in the future. She found that he failed to rehabilitate himself, stating on page 39, paragraph 29 of the proposed decision, quote, "At hearing, respondent did not express remorse. To the contrary, respondent expressed contempt for the fact he is not allowed to fish in the areas designated as MPAs and felt he should have a special exemption to do so," end quote. As long as Mr. Esparza's license, these violations will continue. The only way to protect fishery resources in this case is to revoke Mr. Esparza's commercial fishing privileges. Past decisions by the Commission, which have been designated as precedential, should inform your decision today. I'd like to quickly remind you of the facts and ultimate results from those presidential decisions. In the matter of the accusation against Tecklenburg, decided in 2017, the Commission permanently revoked Tecklenburg's commercial fishing license after the department proved that he twice took undersized lobsters, possessed halibut without a sport fishing license, possessed barred sand bass under 14 inches long, failed to raise closed and baited lobster traps within 6 days after the close of the lobster season, failed to raise, clean, and service empty lobster traps at intervals not to exceed 96 hours, and took lobsters after the close of the commercial season. In the matter against Pursuit Fishing LLC, and John Woodrum, decided in 2020. The commission permanently revoked respondents' CFL and commercial passenger fishing vessel permit after the department proved the respondents had fished illegally in a marine conservation area, filleted fish on board without leaving a portion of the skin intact, submitted vessel logs late, unlawfully filleted a fish with a size limit, possessed undersized bocaccio, and allowed a person to fish on board without possessing a fishing license. And the last precedential decision I'd like to remind you of is in the matter of accusation against Hornbacher, decided in 2021. The commission permanently revoked Hornbacher's commercial fishing license, marine aquaria collector permit, and tidal invertebrate permit after the department proved that Hornbacher had collected marine aquaria specimens in a closed area, used harmful substances to anesthetize the specimens, possessed oversized rockfish, and failed to complete logbook and an observer's log. The precedential Hornbook decision states, quote, while the evidentiary significance of misconduct is greatly diminished by the passage of time, it is outweighed by Hornbacher's failure to provide evidence of rehabilitation, his downplaying of his culpability, and his failure to address his dishonesty with wildlife officers, end quote. The case at issue today is as egregious, if not more so, than these three precedential cases. All three of these cases resulted in permanent revocations. Through his actions and his words, Mr. Esparza has demonstrated his contempt for your regulations and his inability to comply with commercial fishing laws designed to conserve marine resources. Respectfully, President Sklar and Commission members, I urge you to impose a lifetime revocation of Mr. Esparza's commercial fishing privileges, including his commercial fishing license and lobster operator permit today. Thank you.
Thank you. So Mike, is that it? Are we ready to go to? Okay, so we're going to recess. So we'll come back at 1:45, and we'll be picking up with item number 22 after we complete our executive session. Thank you all. Good afternoon, everybody. Can I have your attention, please? Welcome back to the California Fish and Game Commission October meeting, our second day. And we just had executive session during our lunch break, and I'd like Council Mike Yon to report on that.
Thank you, President Sklar. The commission met in closed session and made 3 decisions that I've been asked to report on. That is on the proposed decision regarding agency case number 22 ALJ 011-FGC regarding the suspension of Michael Velasquez's commercial fishing license and lobster operator permit. The commission chose to adopt the proposed decision. Regarding the proposed decision in agency case number 20 ALJ 12-FGC regarding the denial of an amendment to Joseph Carvalho's restricted species permit, the commission adopted the proposed decision. And regarding the agency case number 22 ALJ 006-FGC regarding revocation of Arthur Esparza's lobster operator permit and commercial fishing license, the commission chose to enter an order revoking the permit and license.
Great, thank you, Michael. So now we're going back to item number 23, which is recreational take of sea urchins. I'd like to propose to my fellow commissioners that we do this, so that we let the staff read the motion that they've come up with, which is the idea of which was to give us a little more flexibility in our next discussion and then an possible adoption meeting. Do want to point out that one of the options in there is not to do nothing, because that's not part of the eyesore in the proposal, but that it remains a commission choice to do nothing. And that will remain the choice up until, and if we have a vote on the proposals that are before us. I just want to make that clear that that remains a choice, and doing nothing means these permits expire and sunset permanently until further action by the commission. So I think it's worth just clarifying that. It's not an option in these documents, it's a choice that the commission retains. That being said, Susan, can you read the motion that you and the staff worked hard over lunch on? I'm sorry you didn't get to eat.
Oh, that's okay.
If you get hangry, let us know. We'll pass some chocolate down.
And a huge thank you to Miss Susan for working hard over lunch while the rest of us got to go enjoy.
Yeah, that's what I just said, yeah.
And thank you to
Yeah.
some colleagues
Susan.
that stayed with me too. So our little science team at the commission. So the proposed motion is that the commission authorizes publication of a notice of its intent to amend section 29.06 as follows. 1, extend the sunset date for Casper Cove for the Casper Cove regulation for 5 years in the area defined in subsection 29.06 D1. And 2, include an option to extend for 5 years the sunset date for Tanker Reef regulation within a portion of the current urchin removal area defined in subsection 29.06 D2, which is identified in the draft eyesore as option 2, which is in exhibits 2 and 3, recognizing that the commission may choose to make adjustments to the boundaries of said portion.
Perfect. Are you both good with that? Alf and Jackie?
Yes.
Commissioner Hauser-Carmson, are you any questions or thoughts about that?
I support that revision.
Okay. Now, I just want to give my fellow commissioners an option to speak to this in general, now that we've had now a motion in front of us, and we've had a long discussion and had multiple years of discussion this, whether there's anything anybody wants to say right now, or do they want to hold it to the next meeting? Okay. Okay. So I will make that motion as Susan read.
And I will second.
Motion-
We also have a motion to make on Casper, though. Did you say that part?
It was all one.
Oh, it's all wrapped in there. Oh, terrific. Wonderful. So sorry.
No worries.
Terrific.
So motion made by me, seconded by Vice President Zavaleta. Roll call, please, Sherry.
President Sklar,
Aye.
Vice President Zavaleta,
Aye.
Commissioner Murray,
Aye.
Commissioner Hostler-Carmison.
Aye.
Okay, thank you all. We're done with that for today. We'll be talking about it at our next meeting. On to item number 24, which is commission policies. As usual, Rachel, will you read the instructions for people who would like to comment on this?
Yes, thank you, President Sklar. And as a reminder for folks who are online, we do request that folks raise their hand at the beginning of every agenda item, and that folks who are in the room make sure to have their speaker cards in before the beginning of the agenda item on which they would like to speak. Our queue is only open for the first 2 to 3 minutes of each agenda item, and so if you raise your hand after that, you will not be added to the queue. So, starting item 24, this is the call for public comment on item 24, commission policies. If you would like to speak on this item and you are online, please press the raise hand button now, or if you are on phone only, please press *9 on your phone. The queue for this item will be open for the first 3 minutes of the item, so please raise your hand no later than 2:11 p.m. if you would like to speak on item 24.
Thank you, Rachel. And this is your item too, so please go ahead.
Thank you. In December of last year, 2022, the commission requested staff develop an initial plan for review of policies that includes a Jedi and tribal lens. Throughout the next several meetings, staff worked closely with the department to undertake an initial review of the department's 63 policies and developed and presented a framework for categorizing each of the policies into one of 5 bins. Upon further commission direction, commission and department staff worked together to categorize each of these policies into one of the 5 bins, with one additional bin for policies that were unclear or need more work. For reference, this categorization of each policy is included in Exhibit 3 in your binder. Additionally, at the August meeting, staff identified 6 policies, which we do not believe need update.